He came home seeking peace, but found his wife's name carved in stone. In a town veiled in pine and silence, a soldier returned from war only to stumble upon a coffin, his daughter sobbing in the rain, and no one able to meet his eyes. As the ropes tightened and the ground opened wide, something thumped beneath the lid, and the dog who once stood with him through gunfire barked, lunged, and clawed at the coffin like the heartbeat inside was his own. What they uncovered that day wasn't just a mistake, it was a lie designed to stay buried, until 4 legs refused to let it die. Under a pewter sky where the mist hung low over the spines of towering pines, Logan Hayes stepped off the last bus into Evergreen Hollow, Oregon, a sleepy mountain town that hadn't changed since he left 2 years ago. The rain wasn't a storm, only a steady drizzle, cold and fine, soaking into the earth and clinging to his boots as he walked the narrow sidewalk lined with silent shops shuttered early for the afternoon. His breath was visible in the air, and his duffel bag, heavier with the weight of returning than when he'd left for deployment, dug into his shoulder. Logan was a man of 38, his frame lean from years of discipline, his square jaw shadowed with dark stubble, eyes the color of riverstone always scanning, always absorbing. There was a stillness in him, the kind that comes only from war and from surviving it. He hadn't expected a welcome. Clara hadn't written in the last week, but that wasn't new. She'd been swamped at the hospital, always between night shifts and the chaos of intern schedules. Still, something felt wrong. There had been no call, no message. Not even from Ellie, their 5-year-old daughter who never went more than 3 days without trying to leave a voicemail riddled with missing words and laughter. Logan took the path that led past the general store and through the edge of Hollow Hill Cemetery, intending only to cut through to his street. But what he saw rooted him in place. Rows of umbrellas stood in a semicircle around an open grave. A pine coffin sat above the damp earth, suspended by thick ropes. White chrysanthemums trembled in gloved hands. And in front of it all, beneath a black coat 3 sizes too large, a small child was sobbing. Ellie. She was kneeling in the mud, her brown curls soaked and plastered to her cheeks, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her little hands clutched the edge of the coffin as if her grip alone could hold back whatever lay inside. Logan felt the breath leave his lungs. He dropped his duffel and ran. A black and tan blur lunged from behind the mourners, barking sharply Ranger. The German Shepherd was already soaked, his powerful frame low to the ground, muscles taut as he circled the coffin and then darted toward Logan. The dog was 8 now, his muzzle flecked with silver, but his presence still commanded attention. He leapt at Logan, not out of joy, but urgency teeth grazing the man's sleeve, pulling him toward the grave. His bark became sharp, rhythmic, alarmed. Logan's heart pounded as he finally saw the photograph resting against the easel at the front of the funeral canopy. Clara's face. His wife. "Who the hell?" Logan's voice cracked. "What is this?" The mourners turned, some gasping. A woman stepped forward from the front row, tall and meticulously composed, despite the rain soaking her neat black coat. Deborah Millstone, Clara's cousin, though she preferred Deborah, with the coldness of someone who wore titles instead of warmth. She had always been sharp too sharp, and had worked for years in hospital administration before transitioning to private insurance. Her chin lifted slightly as she saw Logan. "Logan," she said flatly. "We tried to reach you. Clara collapsed 3 days ago. Cardiac arrest. No response. We couldn't wait." "You what?" he said, voice rising. "I didn't receive any call, any letter, any message. This is a mistake." "We followed protocol," Deborah said crisply. "She was pronounced—" But Logan wasn't listening. Ellie had run into his arms, sobbing hard. "Daddy," she choked. "Mommy said not to let them take her. She said she's not gone yet." Something in Logan twisted. He looked at Ranger, who was now pacing around the coffin again, barking low, his hackles up. The dog's instincts, finely honed from years in the field, were rarely wrong. And then, the impossible happened. The coffin lid shifted, barely a tremor, enough to make Logan freeze. A second time, more visible. A muffled sound could have been the wind, could have been breath. He stepped forward. "Don't you dare lower that!" he barked at the two attendants holding the ropes. "Logan!" Deborah's voice was sharp now. "Don't disgrace her memory!" He ignored her, already gripping the metal latch. "She wrote to me a week ago. She was fine." With effort, his knuckles white, he lifted the lid. The casket opened with a faint hiss as the cold air hit it. There inside lay Clara, skin pale, lips parted slightly, sweat glistening on her brow. Her chest rose, barely, but unmistakably. "She's breathing," someone gasped. Ranger barked once, loud and definitive, before sitting at the base of the coffin like a sentinel. A nurse among the mourners ran forward to check for a pulse. "She's alive! We need to get her out, now!" Deborah stumbled backward, her face losing color. Logan didn't wait. He scooped Clara into his arms, whispering her name, and turned toward the waiting car. Ellie held Ranger's collar, eyes wide with hope and fear, and the German shepherd stood tall beside her, gaze fixed on Clara's pale face, tail still. Far above them, through the trees, a lone black bird wheeled once and disappeared into the mist. The storm had passed, leaving behind a damp hush that hung low over Evergreen Hollow, like a breath held too long. At the town's modest medical center, Clara lay in the ICU beneath layers of sterile white sheets, a tangle of monitors and IV lines encircling her like vines. Her eyelids fluttered occasionally, her pulse still delicate, but steady. A nurse adjusted the oxygen cannula, pausing briefly to glance at the family standing just outside the glass door. Logan, tall and unmoving, eyes locked on his wife's still frame. Ellie, curled up in one of the hallway chairs with her thumb in her mouth, and Ranger resting his massive head on her lap. Ranger, ever alert, had not taken his eyes off Clara since the ambulance ride. The German shepherd's ears flicked with every beep of the machines, and every time someone in scrubs walked by, his body tensed. He was nearly 10 now, his black and tan coat dulled slightly with age, but his instincts remained razor-sharp. He watched the ICU like it was a battlefield, and Clara, his commander, down. Logan hadn't spoken much since the moment in the cemetery. The shock had worn off only to be replaced by an unrelenting sense of disquiet, a hum in his bones telling him that something about Clara's condition and how it had been handled was wrong. The door to the ICU creaked open. A young woman in navy scrubs stepped out, holding a tablet pressed to her chest. She was slender, with deep brown eyes and a curtain of straight black hair tucked neatly into a low ponytail. Dr. Kayla Nguyen was in her late 20s, a second-year resident at Evergreen Hollow Medical. She had been Clara's closest colleague in the ER, quick-witted, determined, and quietly protective. She glanced at Logan, then lowered her voice. "They won't let me run a full report yet," she said. "But I reviewed what's on file. There are inconsistencies, Logan." He straightened. "What kind?" "They logged her as arriving in cardiac arrest, with no pulse, no respiration. But there's no detail, just a single note that says DOA confirmed by attending." She paused. "No name, no timestamp, no ECG strip, nothing." Logan narrowed his eyes. "That's not protocol," Kayla nodded. "Not unless someone wanted to make it look official without actually checking anything." From the chair nearby, Ellie spoke softly without looking up. "Mommy told me not to let them take her. She said it last night. In the woods. But I wasn't in the woods. I was in bed." Kayla gave Logan a questioning look. He shook his head. "She's been saying things like that since Clara collapsed." Ranger let out a low, warning growl. Logan turned to see Deborah approaching from down the hall. She looked composed as always, her blonde hair wrapped into a perfect twist, dark coat buttoned to her chin, heels tapping in rhythmic certainty. She carried a bouquet of white roses. "Any updates?" she asked, her voice too level, too smooth. Her eyes never quite met Logan's. "She's stable," Logan replied curtly. Ranger stepped between them, his body tense. Deborah eyed him. "That dog's become a menace," she said. "You should keep him away from sensitive areas." "He's better at detecting danger than most people I know," Logan answered. Deborah's smile was tight. "I'm only here to support Ellie. She's my goddaughter." "She doesn't need roses. She needs answers," Logan said. Later that evening, back at the house, Logan stood in Clara's study. It was a small sunlit room with built-in shelves stacked with medical journals, old photographs, and potted plants that had dried from neglect. The desk was cluttered but organized in Clara's meticulous way, sticky notes in color-coded stacks, old prescriptions in folders, a stethoscope draped over the back of the chair. Logan ran his fingers over the drawer handles, eyes pausing on a locked cabinet. Ranger padded into the room behind him, ears alert. The dog moved toward the drawer and sniffed intently, tail stiff. Then, as if sure, he pawed once at the lower left side. Logan knelt and pulled it open. Inside was a single manila envelope thick with folded letters and medical notes, and at the very bottom a small metal USB drive labeled Emergency. Logan slid it into his pocket and pulled out one of the letters. The handwriting was Clara's sharp, slanted, always written in one breath. "If you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I've always known my body doesn't respond like others. I had a near-fatal reaction in residency, a cardiac episode that made monitors flatline. I came back after 4 minutes. They tried to label it a miracle. I call it negligence. If they ever pronounce me dead again without 3 separate confirmations, fight it. Don't let them bury me. Not again." His chest tightened. He plugged the USB into his laptop and clicked open the first file video footage. Time-stamped from 2 nights prior. Clara's ICU room. A man in a white coat entered the room. He moved quickly, smoothly. His face was obscured by a surgical mask, no ID badge, no name. The man stood at the bedside, adjusted Clara's IV bag, and injected something from a small vial into the line. Ranger growled. The hair along his back stood up. Logan froze the screen and zoomed in. The vial label was partially visible. Etomidate, a powerful sedative used in rapid intubation. In high doses, it could simulate loss of brain activity. He took a breath and pressed play. The man exited silently. A minute later, a second figure entered the hallway outside, a tall woman in black, coat slick with rain. Deborah. Logan shut the laptop. In the living room, Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with a blanket and Ranger beside her. The dog lifted his head when Logan entered, eyes questioning. He sat down next to them, pulled Ellie close, and stared at the flickering fireplace. Something had been done to Clara, intentionally, and whoever had tried to silence her had underestimated 3 things: a daughter who still listened in dreams, a dog trained to never stop tracking, and a soldier who didn't walk away from the ones he loved. The morning came gray and still, a heavy fog curling between the pine trees that lined the road out of Evergreen Hollow. In the kitchen, a faint scent of black coffee mingled with the chill. Logan stood by the sink, staring into the backyard where frost lingered on the grass. His eyes were drawn not to the trees or the clouded sky, but to Ranger. The German shepherd stood perfectly still beneath the porch awning, ears pricked, tail low, watching something that wasn't there. Inside, the laptop still glowed with the paused footage from the USB. The frame frozen on a man in surgical white, his masked face turned slightly toward the reflective metal panel on Clara's IV stand. In that moment of stillness, his features just barely visible, twitched. Logan had zoomed in and enhanced the clip multiple times. The angle was imperfect, but the face partially hidden awakened something in his memory. He called Kayla. She arrived an hour later, dressed in a long navy coat, hair still damp from the fog outside. Her expression was composed, but her brows pinched in the way they always did when something didn't sit right. Kayla had the kind of face that rarely betrayed fear, but couldn't mask concern. She joined Logan in the study, Ranger following close behind her, head lowered like a shadow. "He's not in any of the hospital's employee records," she said, after scrubbing through the footage again. "I asked one of the admin nurses to cross-check his build and movement against the night shift roster. Nothing." Logan's fingers drummed against the edge of the desk. "Look here." He tapped the screen where the man's face turned slightly, reflected in the IV's chrome surface. "See that scar across his cheek? That's not new." Kayla leaned in. "You've seen him before?" Logan nodded slowly. "I think so. Years ago. He worked tech support equipment maintenance. Name was Daniel Cross, that's it. Us." Kayla's lips parted. "Daniel Cross? The same guy who got flagged for misusing sedatives in patient transfers?" "I don't know if it was ever proven, but Clara mentioned him once, said he gave her the creeps, that he lingered in places no one expected him. Said he used to fix machines that weren't broken." Ranger let out a sharp bark. Logan turned. The dog's eyes were locked on the laptop screen. His hackles rose again. "That settles it," Logan said. "We need to know why someone with that history is walking into ICU rooms like a ghost." Kayla pursed her lips, already pulling out her phone. "I have a contact at Clara's old hospital, Mercy Ridge, back in Salem. If Cross ever worked there, they'll have a record." Logan and Kayla made the 2-hour drive through the winding pass just before noon. Ranger rode in the back, head out the window, nose twitching at every turn. The deeper they got into the hills, the more the landscape changed. Less picturesque, more industrial. Salem's outskirts bore the look of a town caught between decay and gentrification. Mercy Ridge stood at the edge of a strip mall, a mid-sized hospital surrounded by parking lots and silence. At reception, they were met by a woman named Lorraine Marsh. She was short, tightly built, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a bun, and the weary efficiency of someone who had seen a lifetime of bureaucracy. Her floral blouse was tucked beneath a hospital-issued vest, and a lanyard of keys jingled as she walked. "I remember Clara," she said. "Hard worker, smart, never caused trouble. Unlike most." Her smile faded when Logan mentioned Daniel Cross. Daniel was odd, never rude, just quiet. But things went missing when he was around. Medications, tools, records. "Was he ever disciplined?" Kayla asked. "They opened an investigation. He was suspended briefly, but then he resigned, quietly. No charges filed." Lorraine's voice dropped. "It was hush-hush, then he just disappeared." Logan's jaw clenched. "Who handled his hiring?" Lorraine hesitated. "It was before my time, but you'd need to check HR archives. Those are in storage." "Could you pull the form?" Kayla asked. "It'll take time," Lorraine said, "but I'll see what I can do." As Lorraine disappeared down the hallway, Logan wandered into the administrative wing, Ranger trailing him. The air smelled of stale printer ink and lemon cleaner. On one wall was a faded photo collage of past hospital board members. Logan stopped. Third frame from the left, Deborah Millstone. She wore the same tight smile, the same severe twist of blonde hair. Her title beneath the photo, Director of Human Resources, 2012 to 2018. "Of course," Logan muttered. Back at Evergreen Hollow that evening, Logan and Kayla gathered in Clara's hospital room. Her condition remained unchanged, stable, but unconscious. Ellie sat nearby, cross-legged on the floor with a coloring book open on her lap. She'd drawn a forest. In the center stood a woman in a white coat, surrounded by trees with hollow eyes. A crow hovered above her head. "Ellie," Logan said gently, "what's that?" She didn't look up. "It's Mommy, in the woods. The crow was trying to find her." Kayla knelt beside her. Did Mommy say anything in your dream? Ellie nodded. She said the bad man still has the key. Logan and Kayla exchanged a glance. The next morning, Lorraine called. I found something. She faxed over a single sheet of faded paper Daniel Cross's original hiring form, scanned and signed. Approved by Deborah Millstone. The light in Clara's hospital room had shifted by inches, the way sunlight does when time passes slowly and heavily. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, a mix left behind by the nurse who had just stepped out. Machines hummed, monitors blinked, and at the center of it all, Clara Miller stirred. Her eyelids fluttered once, then again, before slowly lifting. Her breathing was uneven, her mouth dry, and her arms felt like lead. It took her several seconds to realize she wasn't dreaming. The ceiling above her was familiar hospital-grade white, with faint water stains in the corners. But her mind hadn't caught up to her body. She tried to speak, but her throat burned. It was only when she moved her head slightly that she saw a face slumped on the edge of the bed. Ellie. Her daughter's chest rose and fell in gentle rhythm, a coloring pencil still clutched in her small hand. Just beside her was Ranger, his massive body curled protectively around the chair, his eyes closed, but his ears flicking at every sound. The sight of them made Clara's heart lurch. She turned her head the other way and saw the faint reflection of a figure in the window Logan, speaking with someone outside the room. Then her memory returned with a wave of panic. The needle, the chill flooding her veins, the tightening in her chest. And that face in the mirror. Daniel's eyes, blank and distant. Clara tried to sit up, but found her body unwilling. Panic surged. She reached for the call button, but knocked it off the bed with a weak flick of her wrist. At that moment, Ranger's ears twitched. His eyes opened, locked onto hers, and in an instant he stood and barked once, sharp, purposeful. Ellie woke with a start. "Mama?" she gasped, dropping the pencil. Ranger barked again, tail wagging frantically now. Clara reached for her daughter's hand and nodded. Just barely. Ellie burst out the door, shouting for her father. Logan returned within seconds, followed closely by Kayla. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot, but the moment he saw Clara awake, a visible crack ran through his tension. He dropped to his knees beside her. "You're safe," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You made it." Clara tried to respond, but only a rasp escaped. Kayla gently administered a sip of water and adjusted the bed slightly. "You don't need to speak yet," Kayla said softly. "Just rest. But if you're strong enough, nod if you remember what happened." Clara paused, then slowly nodded. Ranger rested his chin on the edge of the bed, never breaking eye contact with her. Later that afternoon, Kayla asked for a few quiet minutes alone with Clara and Logan. Ellie was taken to the garden courtyard with a volunteer nurse, Sarah Blevins, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s with gentle eyes and a slight limp from a past skiing accident. Sarah was one of those people who listened more than she spoke and had a calming presence that Ellie clung to instinctively. "Clara," Kayla began gently, "we need to know everything you remember." Clara's voice was barely audible, but her words were clear. "It wasn't a seizure. I felt it. A needle. Cold. In my arm." "Do you remember who did it?" Logan asked. She hesitated, blinking slowly. "He didn't speak, but I saw him. In the mirror. He had no ID. Just gloves. Eyes like glass. It was Daniel. He watched me fade." Kayla jotted quick notes. And then, nothing. Just this dark, heavy feeling like my body wasn't mine anymore. But I was still inside it. I couldn't move or scream. I thought, this is it. Logan reached for her hand. It wasn't. Ranger kept fighting. Clara's eyes drifted toward the dog, and she smiled faintly. "Good boy." That evening, Ellie drew again. She sat cross-legged on the hospital floor, Ranger beside her. The crayon scraped across paper as she worked intently, brows furrowed. When she was done, she handed it silently to Logan. The drawing showed a man with no eyes standing under a tree. Above him was a crow with its wings spread wide. Behind them, a window with a white cloth hanging half out its end, dipped in something red. "She saw the towel," Clara whispered. "I saw it too. It had blood on it. Before I blacked out." Logan stared at the picture, unease tightening in his chest. The next day, Deborah returned to the hospital. She arrived in her usual polished manner, wearing a tailored plum-colored coat, black gloves, her blonde hair twisted into an elegant bun. But her eyes were sharper now, as if searching for weakness. She requested a meeting with the hospital's legal liaison and filed a petition for temporary guardianship of Ellie. She claimed Clara was exhibiting signs of acute psychological instability and that Logan, having just returned from deployment, was emotionally compromised. Deborah cited her ongoing concern for the child's well-being and presented fabricated letters from 2 family service contacts. Kayla intercepted the documents and brought them to Logan, her mouth tight. "She's pulling strings in family services," Kayla said. "The 2 signatures here look at the dates. One of them was on maternity leave. The other hasn't worked in this district for a year." Logan clenched his jaw. "She planned this before Clara even woke up." "She timed it to your leave status," Kayla added. "If you had arrived a week later, she might have pulled Ellie into custody." Logan's hands curled into fists. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen." That night, Logan awoke to the sound of Ranger barking sharply once, then twice. The dog stood rigid at the bedroom window, his posture alert, hackles raised. Logan moved quickly, pulling aside the curtain, but there was nothing outside, just trees, mist, and the rustling of dry branches. Then Ranger barked again, louder, and scratched at the front door. Logan opened it, and the dog bolted into the fog without hesitation, disappearing toward the tree line. "Ranger!" Logan called, heart hammering, but the dog was already gone. The sky was still ink black when Ranger returned. The front door creaked under the weight of the wind, and Logan startled awake at the sound of scratching just below the porch light. He opened the door to find the German Shepherd standing there, mud-caked from paws to belly, fur damp and clinging in clumps. In his mouth, clutched gently, was a shredded piece of fabric white, smeared with something dried and reddish-brown. Ranger dropped it at Logan's feet and looked up, panting hard, eyes sharp with urgency. Logan crouched beside him. "What is this, boy?" he whispered. The cloth bore a faint logo Mercy Ridge Medical and a torn name tag still attached by a loose thread. The letters were half gone, but just enough remained to read. "Cross." A beat passed. Then Ranger turned and bolted toward the edge of the woods, barking once as if to say, "Follow me." Logan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, slipped on his boots, and left a quick note for Clara. The sky was beginning to pale as he jogged after the dog, the cold air biting against his face. Ranger led him through thick brush and wet soil, deeper into the woods behind the house places Logan hadn't walked in years. The silence was uncanny, broken only by snapping twigs and the distant call of an early bird. Eventually, they reached a clearing, an overgrown thicket with a small, crumbling shack set low against the trees. Its roof sagged like the spine of something defeated, and moss coated its walls in patches. Ranger froze just short of the front step and crouched low, ears forward, hackles raised. Logan motioned for him to stay, then crept up to the door and eased it open. The inside smelled of rust and decay, mingled with something sharper alcohol or bleach. A cot was shoved against the far wall, a pile of stained blankets twisted on top. Empty pill bottles littered the floor, along with waterlogged paper and several used syringes. And then in the far corner, curled like a spider retreating from light, was Daniel Cross. He was thinner than Logan remembered, almost skeletal, with a beard grown wild and greasy hair falling into his face. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, hands twitching in small, nervous movements. He didn't even flinch when Logan entered, just stared as if expecting judgment or death, or both. "I know you," Daniel said quietly, his voice dry. "You're her husband." Logan didn't answer. He simply stepped aside and let Ranger enter. The dog bared his teeth and growled low in his throat, but didn't pounce. Just stood between Daniel and the door. "You brought him," Daniel whispered. "I thought he'd find me." Logan's voice was quiet. "Why did you do it?" Daniel let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "Because I was told she wouldn't survive. That she was already gone. And if I didn't help keep it clean, they'd ruin me." "Deborah," Logan said. Daniel nodded, head jerking like a broken puppet. "She came to me after the last job fell through. Said she'd make it right. Said Clara was in shock cardiac failure, brain death imminent. That I'd be doing her a kindness. She handed me the vial and told me the paperwork was covered. That I just had to help the system along. And you believed her? I needed the money. And the silence. I didn't want another investigation. Not after what happened at St. Joseph's." Daniel looked up now, his face streaked with grime. "I thought she was right. But then..." Clara opened her eyes. She looked at me. And I knew. I knew I'd buried someone alive. Logan stepped back, fists clenched. "You're coming with me." Daniel didn't fight. He stood on shaking legs and followed Logan out, his hands raised. Ranger circled behind them like a guard. By the time they reached the nearest road, the sheriff's deputy had arrived. Logan had called en route, voice low but firm. Deputy Martha Calloway, a tall woman with braided gray hair and a no-nonsense gaze, stepped out of her cruiser with a hand on her holster. Martha was known in Evergreen Hollow for her quiet authority and unshakable presence. She'd served the town for nearly 20 years, having once been the only black female officer in the entire county. Her eyes flicked between Logan, Daniel, and Ranger without a word before she opened the back door and cuffed Daniel without ceremony. "You'll want to come with me to file a statement," she said to Logan. Back at the hospital, forensic teams examined the piece of bloodied blouse and the used syringes Logan had recovered from the shack. Kayla, now working unofficially alongside the investigators, coordinated the submission of the USB drive, which held both the original footage of Daniel's visit to Clara's room and the audio recordings Logan had captured from the shack with his phone. 2 hours later, DNA results confirmed the blood on the blouse matched both Clara and Daniel. The sedative found in the syringe's etomidate matched the residue in Clara's IV line. It was enough. But there was still one more thread to tie. Logan returned to Clara's room just past noon. She was awake now, propped up against pillows, a blanket tucked around her shoulders. Ellie sat beside her, drawing once more. Today's picture was softer. No figures with blank eyes, just a forest path and a small black dog chasing a butterfly. "They have him," Logan said gently. "He talked." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, tears prickling. "And Deborah?" "She's next." That evening, Ranger slept at the foot of Clara's bed, finally resting. For the first time in days, his body was calm. Logan stood beside the window, watching the wind stir the trees outside, the pine branches whispering secrets they'd long kept buried. But not anymore. Autumn had settled over Evergreen Hollow like a warm shawl, softening the harsh edges of the past weeks. The once heavy clouds had given way to a pale golden sky, and the pine trees, steadfast and whispering, seemed to hum with relief as the town prepared for the annual homecoming festival. It was the first time Logan felt the tension in his chest begin to ease, though the memory of the cemetery and Clara's fragile breath in his arms still played in his mind like a haunting echo. Now Clara was no longer pale or bound to machines. Her face had regained its color, her voice a melody of quiet strength. She stood by the porch that morning, wearing a simple white cardigan and jeans, her hair pulled back into a neat braid, the same calm determination in her brown eyes that had always made Logan trust her instincts. Beside her, Ellie twirled in a dress patterned with tiny sunflowers, her laughter rising like a bird taking flight, while Ranger sat proudly, his tail sweeping across the wooden porch with lazy, content strokes. The arrest of Deborah Millstone had shaken the town. She was taken away 2 days after Daniel's confession, her carefully crafted facade crumbling under the weight of evidence. Falsified medical records, suspicious insurance policies, and bribed officials in the Family Services Department. The trial would take months, but for Logan, Clara, and Ellie, the fear was over. Deputy Martha Calloway had come by earlier that day to deliver a final report, her tall frame and weathered face softened by a smile. "She won't touch your family again," Martha had said, patting Ranger on the head. The German shepherd, who rarely tolerated strangers, had allowed it with a low, approving rumble. By evening, the town square bloomed with lanterns and strings of light, the smell of roasted chestnuts and apple cider mingling in the crisp air. Logan carried Ellie on his shoulders, her small hands resting on his hair as she gazed up at the colorful paper lanterns swaying above. Clara walked beside them, her hand brushing Logan's arm occasionally, each touch a quiet reminder of the life they'd nearly lost. Ranger, with his sturdy frame and proud gait, moved like a shadow of protection at their side. Children pointed and whispered, "That's the hero dog." And more than once, Ellie puffed out her chest and announced, "His name is Ranger. He saved Mommy." An elderly man with a warm grin, Gerald Turner, the town's unofficial festival organizer, approached them carrying a lantern of pale ivory paper. He was in his late 60s, with a lean build and silver hair tucked beneath a wool cap. His hands, rough from years as a carpenter, trembled slightly as he offered the lantern to Ellie. "Every family gets one," he said with a voice that was both raspy and kind. "But I reckon yours deserves a special wish this year." Ellie smiled shyly and took it, tracing her fingers over the thin paper. Later, as the crowd gathered for the lantern release, Logan knelt beside Ellie and helped her write a message on the lantern, with a calligraphy pen Gerald had lent them. Clara watched from a few steps away, arms crossed gently, her smile wistful. "What do you want to say, sweetheart?" Logan asked. Ellie thought for a long moment, then printed in careful, uneven letters. "Even when the light goes out, someone will find us again." The words made Clara's throat tighten. When the lanterns were released, hundreds of glowing orbs rose into the sky, each one carrying the hopes, regrets, and quiet prayers of the town. Logan, Clara, Ellie, and Ranger stood close together, their lantern ascending slowly above them like a small star. Ellie clapped her hands and whispered, "It's going to tell everyone up there that we're okay now." Ranger's ears twitched as if he understood. After the festival faded into a hum of distant music and laughter, the family returned home. Clara moved through the house with renewed energy, opening the windows to let in the cool autumn breeze. Ellie immediately pulled out her sketch pad at the kitchen table, humming to herself as she began a new drawing. Logan sat on the porch with Ranger, who lay stretched out at his feet, watching the moonlight spill over the pine trees. The bond between man and dog felt deeper now, forged not just by past battles, but by this quiet, miraculous survival. Ellie's new drawing was finished just as Clara brought out 2 cups of tea. She held it up with both hands, her eyes shining. "Look, Mommy! Look, Daddy!" It showed a family of 3, Clara, Logan, and Ellie, standing beneath a glowing lantern. Beside them was Ranger, his form drawn with surprising detail, from the slope of his ears to the proud angle of his tail. Above them, The trees were swaying, each pine needle traced like fine threads. Clara framed the picture that very night, hanging it on the wall above Ellie's bed. When Ellie finally drifted to sleep, her small hand resting on Ranger's fur, Logan stepped out onto the porch again. Clara joined him, leaning her head on his shoulder. They didn't need to speak. The sound of the wind through the pines, the faint rustle of Ellie's sketchbook pages turning in the night air, and the slow, steady breathing of the German shepherd at their feet were enough. For the first time in a long time, the house felt whole. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not the ones that part the seas, but the quiet ones, like a heartbeat returning, a child's drawing of hope, or a loyal dog refusing to give up. In a world full of noise, it is in the whispers beneath the pines, within our homes, and inside our hearts that God often speaks. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that light can still break through the darkest hour. Leave a comment below. Say amen if you believe in second chances, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that remind us we are never truly alone. May God bless and protect everyone who is watching right now.